Making poverty personal, modifying quasi-relative measures of poverty with a subjective context. Poverty is measured in various ways all over the world. Some systems of measurement ensure that people have high enough incomes to feed themselves. Others try to reduce income inequality among the lowest half of income-earning families. Our ideal system of measurement is as follows. A quantitative measure of poverty, which will be an adjustment to the supplemental poverty measurement, as well as measure on a more personal level, which would be a subjective self-survey. The adjusted SPM will offer an approximate threshold that will allow a rough comparison of family resources to an estimation for what is necessary to not be in poverty. Poverty has a more complex definition than just a dollar amount for income, but an accurate assessment of family resources can at least give a general idea on how most families are doing based on their basic living needs and non-discretionary expenditures. However, poverty is much more complex than a set of statistics. Much of our definition of poverty comes from what is available to each family in person. In fact, it seems a bit of a fallacy that many attempts to measure poverty focus merely on statistics, when what really matters is not what happens on the federal level, but what happens on the person level with each individual in each family unit. The self-survey will penetrate to the grassroots level and capture the particulars for each family group. This will clear up discrepancies where a family is seen as impoverished simply by their resources, but is actually fulfilled in their access to basic dignities, and also where a family is seen as outside the poverty threshold when in reality they are struggling to make ends meet. Our system of poverty measurement will, in principle, allow a collection of solid, quantified data while also offering the more important individual information that, by our definition of poverty, distinguishes who is in poverty and who isn't. Our goal is not to find the most efficient or pragmatic system of measurement, nor is it to create a system that decides who receives particular government benefits. Our goal is simply to get a more accurate view of poverty in our country, so that our society as a whole can be better educated on the circumstances in which we live. And moving forward, we will be better prepared to mitigate the problems associated with poverty. So far, we have discussed our system for measuring poverty without talking much about what poverty actually is. Our definition of poverty is that it is a social phenomenon that denies people certain opportunities for a dignified life based on their economic, political, or social standing. Note that poverty is not limited to only those who have limited economic resources. The entire reasoning behind poverty is not that some people have lower incomes. It is that as a result of lower incomes, some people lack the ability to have the basic human rights necessary for a dignified life. Any person that is wrongfully denied access to these rights is, by our definition, in poverty, and should be aided by the community to attain those rights. It is also necessary to our definition of poverty that we define these basic human rights and what is necessary for a dignified life. A dignified human life is more than mere survival. There are certain things outside of caloric intake and a roof that will allow a life to be dignified and fulfilling. Here we draw from Dr. Martha Nussbaum, a professor of ethics at the University of Chicago. In her book, Creating Capabilities, Nussbaum presents a list of 10 central capabilities that are necessary for a dignified life. We present our adjustment of those capabilities, but maintain the claim that a life without the realistic option to have or exercise even one of these things jeopardizes a person's ability to have a dignified life and forces them into poverty. Nussbaum's central capabilities are the right to life, the right to Nussbaum's central capabilities are the right to life, the right to bodily health, the security of bodily integrity, the right to one's senses, imagination, and thoughts, the right to emotions, the capability of practical reasoning, the ability to affiliate towards others, the ability for leisure and recreational play, and the capability of control over one's environment. Further definitions and explanations of these capabilities are listed here on this slide. Nussbaum also included the capability of interacting with other species. However, we felt that with emotion and affiliation towards others already being listed, that this was not something that necessarily dictated a dignified human life. We did, however, add our own capability, which is equal access to education. We believe this is so crucial to career mobility and having the option or freedom to move out of poverty that it should be listed specifically as a freedom to be able to choose your own education or at least have access to it. Our quantitative measure of poverty is an adjustment to the SPM. It looks at the 33rd percentile of Americans, sees how much they spend on food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, multiplies that by 1.2 to see how much they need to spend on basic needs and non-discretionary expenditures. Unlike the OPM, which is the official measure for poverty in the United States to this day, the SPM takes into account more than just income, but also near-cash benefits and in-kind benefits. It also adjusts for geographic location and reasons why some things might be more expensive in different locations. Our measure would take the SPM and also add a measure of spread to investigate degree of poverty more than just whether or not a family is impoverished. The second aspect of our system of measurement is our self-survey, which accounts for the crucial aspect of capabilities in the lives of individuals, which is the crux of our definition of poverty. Ideally, these surveys will give insight to how well individuals are able to exercise their central capabilities. This is a quality that can be very specific to the individual, be it a result of geographic location, unique medical circumstances, or social and political pressures. The self-survey must be designed in such a way that can efficiently gauge a person or family's access to central capabilities without leaving too much room for subjectivity to alter the data. This is an area where we could face some possible criticisms. How do we know that we will get accurate information from the self-survey? If it's so subjective, won't everyone who feels like they deserve more resources or just stuff mark themselves as in poverty? The response is that, firstly, there is no incentive to misrepresent oneself on the self-survey, since it is being used simply to get a more accurate picture of poverty on the personal scale, and not as a way to allocate certain government benefits. Secondly, the questions for the self-survey would be carefully worded so that they only allow for responses that convey access to the central capabilities. Here are some example questions for a self-survey on the capability of bodily health. Notice how many of the questions are worded about access or ability to these experiences or resources. This is because we're focusing on capability, not functioning. Notice also that the questions are so worded to make sure the family has just enough of these capabilities in a way that a family won't mark themselves impoverished just because they think that they desire or deserve more than they have. It is important that the self-survey focuses mainly on whether a family has access to these things. An individual does not have to maintain a nutritious diet to have a dignified life. However, they must have the ability to maintain a nutritious diet if they so desired, or else their human dignity is threatened. This is the distinction between functioning, the actual state of being or doing, and capability, the ability or freedom to choose your own state of being or doing. Investigating whether families have central capabilities is discovering if they have the freedoms to decide for themselves the things that give human life meaning. This is why the self-survey is an essential part of our system of poverty measurement. This report outlined our definition of poverty measurement as well as our definition of poverty. We used a modification to the supplemental poverty measure, and we also used a subjective self-survey system. Our underlying goal is to give the issue of poverty a more personalized and geographically subjective context. We aim to achieve this goal by adding more detailed analysis of poverty depth and breadth in our methodology measurement. We reject the de facto policy-based practice of looking at poverty from an absolutist numerical issue. We instead argue for focusing our efforts against the issue of poverty from a context of personhood. We focus so closely on poverty at the individual level because it is the care for the dignified life of each individual in our society that originally motivated us to investigate poverty and its related problems. We believe that implementing this more accurate measure of poverty would help our society develop a better view of poverty as a deeply rooted issue and possibly help it to solve the problems of poverty in the future.